Happy Wednesday, y'all. I hope your Wednesday's going good. Mine's been very productive. So productive that I was like, I tried this new recipe and it was so good. And I was in the pantry and I was like, why don't we go ahead and make plenty of this soup for the winter? And that soup would be tomato soup. Most of you that's followed me for a long time know that I love my tomato soup. I could eat it every day. Even a grilled cheese sandwich on the side sometimes just takes it over the top. But what I've never showed y'all, and I've only spoke of, is my freezer containers that I do freeze my soups, stews, gumbos, etouffees in these containers. Now, I choose the smaller ones because it's just easier for one servings. But these containers, guys, are freezer friendly, dishwasher safe. They're BPA free. And I was actually introduced to these about 3-4 years ago from a good friend of mine, Sarah, who lives in Alabama. And she introduced me to these labels that go on them. They're like a penny a piece. Actually, for a roll of 1,000, probably a half a penny. So a half a cent. They're that cheap. And then you can just peel them off your container, wash your container, and you're off to the races. And you're not sitting there spending and throwing away ZipLock bags or vacuum seal bags because you're reusing something, and they're very affordable. So the containers and the labels that I'm using, I will link in the description. I found some on Amazon. Now, I'm not an Amazon affiliate, but I can link those if you're interested. Like I said, they've got different sizes. But guys, it is very affordable and you can reuse them. But let's talk about the tomato soup. Mr. David and his wife, good friends of mine that live in Northern California, they share recipes off and on with me throughout the year, especially during the holidays. Well, he sent this tomato soup recipe to me and gave me a little back history. This soup recipe originated in Montana from a restaurant called 4B's. It no longer exists. They closed down, I guess, a few years ago, but he was able to get this recipe. He knows I love tomato soup. So I said, well, before I make a bunch of it to freeze, I want to try it. So I cut the original recipe in half and I tried it, and it was delicious. But then I decided to add a little bit more spices, lean it more towards my palate. And when I did, it took it over the top, guys. And that's the good thing about recipes, is you can take the original and then you can formulate it that meets your palate, your taste. And that's what I did, and it was phenomenal. So I said, well, while I'm in the house today, I'm going to make up a big batch. And I was like, well, you hadn't done a video in 2 days, Lippy. Do a video. Plus, I wanted to show the containers because I've answered a lot of y'all's questions about how I store gumbos and things like that. So really, we're just going to do the recipe together. We're actually going to let it cool. We're going to freeze it together, and I'm also going to reserve some to heat up and show y'all what it looks like, because this is a cream base. So we're moving to the stove. I wrote it down how I tweaked it. So in the description, I'm going to give you the recipe to how I changed it up. And all I did was add. I didn't take anything away. I just added. So I'll give the original recipe, and then I'll put additional ingredients, and then I'll list them. And those will be the ones that I actually added to this recipe. But guys, if you like tomato soup, let me tell you what, this is the best I've eaten to date. Here's the star of the show. This is just diced tomatoes. The recipe calls for 32 ounces of diced tomatoes, fresh or canned, just no seasoning. I am tripling this recipe, but this is just a pot of diced tomatoes. This needs to sit here because we got the first step to do. And the first step is heating up 2 tablespoons of butter. Now this is salted butter. You can use unsalted. It calls for 2 tablespoons of diced onions, the original recipe. I'm going in with 1/4 cup of onions. And what we want to do is saute these. My stove eye is sitting about a number 6. So we've got to get these sauteed and translucent just 3-4 minutes. As you can see, I moved my onions to the back burner, and I've brought our diced tomatoes to the front. And we're going to get them going about a number 6. And I'm going in with 6 cups of chicken broth. Like I said, this is going to make a lot, but I'll leave the original recipe in the description. I'm adding 4 tablespoons of sugar. I'm adding a tablespoon to, because I like a lot of black pepper, I think a tablespoon is plenty because I can always season after I heat a bowl up. So that's 1 tablespoon of black pepper. In goes our salt. And that's about a tablespoon of salt. Basil. Now this is dehydrated basil. You can use fresh, but since I'm freezing, I'm going to use dehydrated. It's about a teaspoon to 2 teaspoons. Now this is going to be optional, guys, but I found that I like the basil in the soup. Now we're going to wait on our onions. And then we'll crank the heat up on the stove. Let's add our onions in. And I just cooked them till they were translucent, because we will be blending all of this. Now we're going to give it a good stir. We're going to bring it up to a boil. As you can see, we're reaching that boil. See? Now I'm going to turn it down to a number 4. I don't want it to come to a rolling boil because it'll crest. So we've reached that boil. Now I turned it down to a number 4. Depends on your stove, but what we're going to do is simmer. So yours may be set for a number 2, but you just want a good simmer. And this is where patience come in. 1 hour. 1 hour on the simmering. Now I'm going to come every so often and stir it, which I'm going to do now to make sure that it's, yeah, 4 works great on my stove. But you need it to simmer for 1 hour to allow them flavors to all come together. And we have 2 more ingredients that we're going to add before we put the immersion blender on it. Now, you can leave it like this, but I prefer to cream mine with just a little bit of pieces of tomato. But I'll show you. But right now, 1 hour, stirring occasionally. And make sure that you do not let this boil, okay, because it will crest over. And you could always use vegetable stock if you was going to try to keep it vegetarian. I like the chicken stock. That's usually my go-to. But you can exchange for vegetable stock if you want to. So yeah, I got to go fold clothes, and I'll meet you back here in an hour. All righty. It's been simmering an hour, and I want you to look at this. It has reduced down. It's even thickened. That's from the natural sweetener. Now, this is optional again, but I'm going to add just a little bit of red pepper flakes. Not a lot, because this soup is also going to be enjoyed by the grands as well. So we'll get that stirred in. Baking soda. And you're thinking, baking soda. Okay, I want you to see this reaction. And it's just going to be a pinch. Do you see that? I mean a pinch. Now what you see happening is a reaction to the acid. That pinch of baking soda will cut the acid of the tomatoes. And I know a lot of us, even as we get older, we tend to have a little problem with tomato base. Well, by adding that pinch of baking soda, it will cut the acidity. And that's all that we're doing at this point. Okay, we're turning the heat off. This is where we want it. Now you can leave it small dice like this, but like I said, I'm gonna run the emulsion blender through it. Now take a look at this. There is small little bits just kind of throughout the soup itself. And this is where it gets interesting. Now I'm gonna allow this to completely rest and cool down before we package it up. But if you was to make the original recipe that I will have in the description, this is when you could start adding your cream, your heavy whipping cream, or you can use half and half. But you have to temper it. So the original recipe will be on a standard serving. Like I said, I times mine by 3. So I'm gonna actually scoop some out. I'm gonna temper it with some heavy whipping cream, but we won't be bringing it to a boil because it will curdle. That allows me to have lunch. That allows this to cool down before we package it up for the freezer. But if you just want to go to this step, it's going to have to cool down to almost room temperature, ladle it up, package it up, and put it in the freezer. And then anytime that you want tomato soup, you'll pull your container out and then you'll add just enough cream to your desire. And that really depends on color. You can pretty well judge it. But on the original recipe, it's going to tell you, let me see, 2 cups. 2 cups of cream or half and half to the original. But we won't be doing that. So I'm going to scoop some up in a little saucepan. The same saucepan I washed out that I used the onions in. I'm going to enjoy some lunch while this cools down. And then we'll package this part up. I took a large ladle of our tomato soup base. I'm going to put the heat on about a number 2. I want to maintain a little heat. This is where you do not want the cream and the soup, or the tomato soup, to come to a boil, okay? And I'm going to guesstimate, and that's what you're going to have to do. Let me see where I'm at. And you want to stir it in just like if you were tempering. And I'm almost there. I like mine tend on the pink side. So if I had to guess to that 1 ladle, which is about 3/4 of a cup, I might have added 3 tablespoons. And that's where I want it. So I just want to heat it up low and slow. Take about a minute, and we're ready to plate up, guys. And just like that, we have a delicious cream-based tomato soup. So while our tomato base is cooling down, it's time to eat a bowl. Now, this is where I would add fresh basil, and I'd also add a little bit of Parmesan cheese. So when you pull it out and you want to make you a bowl, by adding just a little bit of that parm and some fresh basil, if you have it, or even dehydrated, it sends it to the moon, guys. But we're gonna try it. It's gonna be hot. The best tomato soup I personally have ever tasted. And it's just simple. I can't explain it. And I have made many of them. This one here, and I do believe it's the chicken broth and the tomatoes that's actually having to cook and simmer and blend all those flavors for an hour. I would even consider doing it, for 2 hours. But it's very rich. It's not acidic by doing that pinch of baking soda. I'm getting a little bit of the red pepper flakes. Of course, I was heavy-handed on the black pepper. So like I said, you could actually exchange black pepper for white pepper. Easier on the stomach. You can leave out the, the red pepper flakes. You could leave that out. But it's just enough that it's not too hot, even for the grandkids. But you can get that little bit of bite. and it's perfect for us. So I'm gonna enjoy my soup, let that cool, and then we'll be back to ladle it up and see how many containers we get. Now, those are 16 ounces, so really that's almost 2 servings. And I may do that because that way when I heat it up, I can have some, you know, just do half of the container, and then either that evening or the next day for lunch, I can do the other half because it's gonna save some more room in the freezer. But guys, this is amazing. I've let it cool about an hour, and now I'm gonna serve it up into our containers. And I would say 2 ladles full. This is a large ladle. I got 8 containers. Now, each container is enough for 2 servings. Now, I do have to make one disclosure. I did taste it before I ladled it up. And for my palate, I need a little bit more salt and a little bit more sugar. But that's where you can do your own taste test and see what you need to add. But this gives you a good base. So I hope you give this a try. I'll leave the recipe down in the description. But as always, stay safe, stay well, and God bless. And I'll see you on the next one.